Okay. There we go. Controls on my Zoom here are a little slow today. I don't know why. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to another random walk down Mill Street. And the topic today is Lag Omer, the 33rd day of the Omer, 1897. So I think all of you probably know the background, but we count 49 days from Passover to Shavuot. It's called the Omer period. Omer literally means a bundle of produce, a bundle of barley, and the Omer is brought. The Omer is brought as a sacrifice. The first bundle of barley harvest is brought on the holiday of Shavuot, and so we count from Passover until Shavuot. That period is called the Omer. We count 49 days as commanded in the Torah, and then there is this special sacrifice on Shavuot. That's just the background for the period. The Talmud then tells you that there was a period of time where tragedy struck, especially the students of Rabbi Akiba, and I think it's 20,000 students died. Some people think this is a reference to Bar Kokhba revolt, because Rabbi Akiba was a supporter of Bar Kokhba, and so all of his followers were probably not impartial during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was put down forcefully by Rome. And so it's a terrible tragedy. And the tradition is that this ended, this period of time, this period of tragic death ended on the 33rd or the 34th day of the Omer. And so it becomes a minor holiday of some sort. There are all sorts of traditions about Shimon Bar Yochai, which are essentially ahistoric, just ahistoric. I'll leave it at that. And modern traditions about lighting bonfires, and it's a fun day, but it doesn't have a lot of ancient history really connected to it. There is a custom of mourning associated with this period of time, which probably begins more in Ashkenaz than it does in Sfarad, and it probably has more to do with crusades than it does with Rabbi Akiva. But I don't know. That's not the topic for tonight. It's just to give you the sense of time frame that we're in. And today, Thursday, May 19th, was the 33rd day in the Omer. So if you're counting, that's what we just had. We will count the next day tonight at the end of the class. Okay. So in Shearith Israel history, this is a significant date because the current synagogue building here on Central Park West and 70th Street was consecrated on Lag BaOmer, Lag Omer, 1897. I think it was May 19th. No, that's today, May 20th, 1897. We're going to see. So let's see what I have for you today. So here we have, this is an excerpt from Dr. Poole's, Dr. Poole has, before his monumental work in 1955, which is called An Old Faith in the New World, Dr. Poole wrote several, I guess you can call them monographs, little booklets about the different synagogue buildings. And the last one he wrote, of course, was the 70th Street building. He wrote it for the 50th anniversary. So this was published in 1947. And he talks about the laying of the cornerstone. First couple pages are talking about why they needed to move from the 19th Street Synagogue to the current building. The 19th Street Synagogue, he mentions basically two reasons. The first and the more important one is that 19th Street and Fifth Avenue was becoming more of a business district. Fewer people were less residential. People weren't living there. They were living further and further north. He even mentions that there was a synagogue in Harlem a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Harlem, which hopefully one day I'll get to tell you about. That was my family's synagogue, the Montefiore congregation. But that's not the topic for tonight either. So, but the point being that people were living further and further north in Manhattan. They were on the east side, on the west side, and into Harlem. They were not living as much in Midtown, what we would call Midtown, 19th Street and Fifth Avenue. So that was the main reason they wanted to move. The other reason they wanted to move is that the synagogue, which was quite large on 19th Street, was not large enough. And on several occasions, they had to alter the interior of the synagogue in order to make more seats. So actually, let me see if I can. Let's see here. No, I guess I don't have it for you. But in the 19th Street Synagogue, in the interior, there were two areas that had originally been empty of seats, but had to be filled in so they would have enough room for people to attend services. Halavai, that should be the case nowadays, but the area behind the Teba, which was a small area that the choir was going to sing in, there was a choir area that was behind the Teba that got filled in with pews. And then there was an area in front of the Teba that got filled in with pews as well. Today we consider that area sacrosanct. And in fact, it was originally designed that way in the 19th Street Synagogue, but necessity, they put in some pews there in order to make room. So by 1895, in the 1890s, they realized they needed a new synagogue. And so they had a committee, one committee for selling it, one committee for finding a new location. And they found a new location on Central Park West and 70th Street after some other choices didn't get made, including the area which is today the Plaza Hotel. But they finally chose this site here on Central Park West and 70th Street. And I'm going to read to you the description of the cornerstone laying ceremony as Dr. Poole writes about it. You can read along with me. Now that the spiritual foundations of the synagogue had been well and truly relayed, he's referring to the fact that when they were determining about the new synagogue, there was an effort that the new synagogue should have mixed seating, family pews, but it got rejected by the congregants, by the electors. And so now he says, now that was all behind us, the committee on laying the physical cornerstone got actively to work. It was planned that the stone should bear on one side the date ante 1682 and on the other 1896. On the festive day, Wednesday, May 20th, 1896, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Mendes opened the ceremony with a blessing of Shehechian. The male choir, under the direction of Leon Kramer, sang the psalm, I rejoiced when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. After the prayer by Reverend Meldola Dasola of Montreal, and the singing of Psalm 67 by the choir, the Reverend Sabato Marias gave an address. So this is the cornerstone laying ceremony. And it's pretty grand. It's not a small event. It's a big event, and we're going to see that a little later. But there's a choir involved. There is the most famous Sephardic rabbis in America at the time, Henry Pereira Mendes, Meldola Dasola, who was a relative of his, and Sabato Marias. They all came for this event of laying the cornerstone of the new synagogue. Then there was an actual laying of the cornerstone. Louis Hyman, vice president of the congregation, presented a trowel to L. Napoleon Levy. You can sort of see this actually happening, a little bow to L. Napoleon Levy, the president, and the following articles were deposited in the stone. And the reason I'm reading this thing to you is because I find this part so fascinating. And one day, if we ever move from this building, if they ever find this cornerstone, I am going to make sure that somebody takes charge of these items. Here they are. A copper plate, 8 inches by 10, inscribed the cornerstone of the fifth holy place of worship, erected by Congregation Church of Israel in the city of New York. So there are very similar ones that we have in the archives from 1818 and 1836 and 1860. It was essentially the same thing they'd been doing previously, making a little plate inscribed with that this is the cornerstone and the date of it, together with the names of the minister, Chazan, the trustees, and the architects of the building, etc. Other names inscribed on parchment and deposited in the stone were those of the president and vice president of the United States, governor and lieutenant governor of the state, the mayor, and other city officials. To this was added a historical sketch of the congregation covering 250 years written by N. Taylor Phillips, and copies of the Constitution and bylaws of the congregation and all its societies. Okay. The link with the 19th Street Synagogue was emphasized by including a description of the laying of the cornerstone on July 11th, 1859. So they have a description of and a Hebrew poem written for that occasion by Reverend Lyons from the 19th Street Synagogue that was done in 1859. The traditional Jewish note was stressed by placing in the stone a Hebrew Bible, a prayer book, a Hebrew and English prayer book, a Hebrew prayer book, tzitzit, tefillin, and mezuzah, a ketubah. I want to know what these were. That's why I'm reading this to you, because I want to know whose tefillin were put in the cornerstone of the 70th Street Synagogue. Whose talit and what mezuzah and what the ketubah looked like. All of that is just a mystery to me, and I'm fascinated by it. A copy of the hymn book used in the Polynese Talmud Torah School, the Lyons and Dasola Jewish calendar, the form of service used in dedication of the Mill Street Synagogue, and the publication of the American Jewish Historical Society, which was brand new at the time. The Constitution and bylaws of the Jewish Theological Seminary. If I tell anybody that in the cornerstone of Sheretz Israel is the Constitution of JTS, I don't know, people wouldn't really believe me. Copy of the letter of the Newport Jewish community to George Washington and his reply. A package of Terra Santa that had been brought to this country for the use of the congregation by Commodore Uriah Phillips Levy. So there is earth from Israel that was brought for use in funeral arrangements in the cornerstone of this building. Finally, the current note was struck by the inclusion of copies of Jewish and secular newspapers of the day, the invitation to these ceremonies, the program, and some copper, silver, and gold coins of the country. When all these, it's a lot of things. When all these articles had been deposited in the stone and it had been sealed up by Mr. Levy, the choir sang the 29th Psalm, and Chazan Nieto read verses from the Bible. The choir sang again. The final address was given by Dr. Mendes, and the choir closed the ceremonies with Adon. I took some time. We're going to read also about some of the other ceremonies, but I wanted you to get a sense of what was done at the laying of the cornerstone of this building in 1896. There was no synagogue yet. It was just a very big ceremony for the initial building of the building. There is also a picture of it. Here it made the news. A newspaper called The World here, published in New York. And here it is, May 21st, 1896. And you can see there is a big stone, and this must be L. Napoleon Levy putting things inside the stone. He has got his trowel here, some workers getting in place, and there are important people. This must be a chazan. You can see he's wearing a gown. It must be a rabbi or chazan. Other people all around. I love the different kinds of hats. Yeah, that's the picture of laying of the cornerstone in 1896. Newsworthy event, to be sure. And here is another write-up of the event from the New York Tribune, May 21st, 1896, page 4. It wasn't the front page news, but page 4. And I guess because we read the description, we don't need to read through this entire report. But there's a couple of things that I thought were quite strange in this report. One is the headliner, the congregation, which is nearly a quarter of a century old. They must mean, and I don't know how to parse the language here, but they must mean that the 19th Street Synagogue was a quarter of a century old, because it was built in 1860 and now it's 1897, 60, 70. I don't know what it means. Nearly a quarter of a century old. I don't understand it. Because it's much older than that. obviously. But okay, well, here's another description of all the different people who were present and all the different things that were done that we read earlier from Dr. And it has a picture of the design. This is the proposed Sheretz Synagogue. It did match what the design was. I looked hard to see if there was anything different, but I couldn't see anything different, other than the fact that the buildings around it are not present. Okay. Now let's see what else I got for you. So it comes a year later. That was May 19th, 1896. Literally 1 year later, May 20th, 1897, is the consecration of the synagogue. And this was also newsworthy, made a bigger newspaper, the New York Times, page 7. And I'll read to you the description here. It's also quite, let's see what I have in the chat here. Nearly a quarter of a millennium. Yeah, yeah, I guess so. 250, I guess so. That must be what it means. Thank you, Hella and Ness and everyone. Okay. Gelman family. So here's the description of the consecration of this building. Beautiful home of the congregation Sheretz Israel, consecrated according to ancient ceremonies. The beautiful and costly new synagogue of Congregation Sheretz Israel, Central Park West and 70th Street, was formally dedicated last evening with the old Orthodox Jewish ceremonials. This congregation was formed by Jews who had been driven from Spain because of their religion, and it worshipped first in a frame building erected in Mill Street in 1682. 3 synagogues stood in turn on that site, the last being built in 1818 after a fire. In 1834, the congregation moved to Crosby Street, where it remained until 1860, when it moved to 19th Street and 5th Avenue. The commodious new house was crowded last evening with members and prominent visitors from other Jewish congregations in the city, guests from Boston, Newport, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco. Several rabbis were present, in addition to those who took part in the services, among them being Dr. Gustav Gottheil, Stephen S. Wise, Frederick Dasola Mendes, Benjamin, and Harris. I guess Rabbi Benjamin and Rabbi Harris. I don't know who they are, but they're listed as well. After an overture by Professor Kramer's orchestra, usually he's called Leon Kramer. This is the first time I've ever seen him referred to as Professor Kramer. I like that. And a song by the choir, came the knocking on the rear door from without. The door was opened by the president, L. Napoleon Levy, and there entered Reverend Dr. Henry Perry Mendes, and a procession bearing the 14 scrolls of the law advanced to the ark. The lamp was lighted by the president, and the proclamation of the unity, that's the Shema, divine majesty and sovereignty of God by the minister followed. During the 7 circuits by the scroll bearers, the Reverend Nieto, assistant to Dr. Mendes, and the choir sang verses from the scripture. The 6th circuit of law saw the elevation of the law. I am not sure what that means. If they couldn't be Levantar, because they would have to undress the Torah and read from it. Maybe it just means that after the 6th circuit they started going into the ark. I don't know what it means, the elevation of the law. At the conclusion of the 7th circuit, the scrolls of the law were deposited in the ark. The concluding exercises were in English and consisted of a prayer by Reverend Meldola Dasola, an address by Dr. Sabato Marias, and a sermon by the Reverend Dr. Henry Perry Mendes, the hymn Adon Olam and the benediction. So there you go. Very similar service to the laying of the cornerstone. There is a much longer and really great, colorful description of this ceremony in another newspaper called the New York Tribune. But I didn't copy it for you. It's too long. It's too long to read through. But if you ask me for it, I'll send you a copy of it. It's really, really quite amazing. But that is the dedication of this synagogue that we all know and love, and it was done today, Lag Omer, in 1897. Oops. Oh no, that's not what I want to do. I have to go back. Okay. Let's see here. That makes me. So I want to just tell you what we do in the synagogue today in recognition of that of this anniversary. So the first thing that you should know is we don't say Tachanun on Lag BaOmer. We don't say Tachanun. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure that it won't play that way again. And make sure that okay. And we'll go back to the slideshow. And we'll go back to sharing my screen. Sorry about that, everybody. So today, so on Lag BaOmer itself, we don't actually make, because it comes different days of the week during the year, and most people are not available to come on a weekday to synagogue. So we observe the anniversary of the consecration of the building on Shabbat. And those are called Consecration Shabbatot. And the ark of the synagogue is left open almost the entire time, both Friday night and Shabbat morning. And special melodies are sung. So on Friday night, we sing festive Lachadodi and festive Kaddish instead of the regular Lachadodi Likrat Kala. That's the regular one. We do a festive one. We do now it's hard for me to transition so easily. Let's see here. All right, it'll come to me. It'll come to you a little later. But and we do a festive Kaddish. That's it. We do this more festive melody. And then in the morning, no, I did the, yes, Albert. I think I did the 3 weeks melody, is what he's going to tell me.
The melody is for Lecha Dodi. Lecha Dodi.
There we go. Yes, that's the one. Thank you. We have the festival Lecha Dodi. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kana. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And then in the morning, we also the ark is open at Baruch Shemar, and it stays open the entire Shachrit, which is confusing for people who aren't used to this thing. And then at the end of Shachrit, after the Amidah, special hashkabot are read. And for this date, we have a special hashkabah for El Napoleon Levy, who was the president of the congregation at the building of this synagogue. His anniversary of his death is different. I think it's in the winter. It's not now. But we recite the hashkabah for him on this Shabbat because he was the prime mover in the building of this synagogue. And so that's what's done. And then the choir will sing some more songs. Then we read Torah. And at the end of the service, we'll have a sermon at the end, and we'll have Emet Malkeinu. So it's a little bit fancier, and the ark stays open the whole Musaf. It stays open the whole service with fancy colors. So I'll tell you just something that happened to me this week. And I'm glad that the Gelmans are on because I think Dr. Gelman will get a kick out of this. So for a consecration Shabbat, we don't have the regular cloaks, of course not. We have the fancy pastel colors like on Yom Tov. So last night I went and I changed all the cloaks in the ark of the synagogue because this Shabbat is a consecration Shabbat. So I spent about 35, 40 minutes. That's how long it takes. Take all the Sefrei Torah out, change the cloaks, put it back in. And then we had a meeting of our COVID committee. And it was determined that because the current situation is a little more drastic than previously, that we were going to pray outdoors this Shabbat. So all of that work, hopefully it's not for naught. At least I'll know that the interior of the synagogue is properly in its pastel colors. Anyway, that is the special service for the consecration of the synagogue. And you can celebrate this at home because we also sing this. We sing Todot El. Todot El v'ni chochai. We sing that in advance of Nishmat Chochai, and we only do that on consecration Shabbatot. So this is that's part of the minhag. Yes, thank you, Dr. Allen. Now we're going to go back to the slideshow. Okay. And here is a description, as Dr. Poole writes about it, of what happened in that event. And I'm going to read through it again because I think it's interesting as well. The invitations had been issued to members and distinguished guests, Jews and Christians, with the warning that no seat would be reserved after 8 o'clock. This is 8 p.m. It's pretty late in the evening. I think it was a Wednesday evening. The choir of men and boys under L.M. Kramer, that's Leon Kramer, the choir master, composed entirely of Israelites, was augmented by Mr. Kramer's Halevi chorus and organ and brass and string instruments. So it must have been pretty grand. A large choir with instrumentation. In addition to the familiar traditional melodies, there was a special music for the occasion. The Se'u She'arim and Zehashar had been composed by Mr. Kramer for this service. I have been looking for that music and have not found it, but it must exist somewhere. And so if I ever do, we'll do this over again, and I'll show you the music that was done. The melody for Psalm 100 was by Barnby. I also spent a good hour looking for, so Barnby was an Anglican composer, and he did lots of music. Some of it's pretty great, actually, Anglican hymns, but it's all very, very Christian. And there are many Psalms, but I could not find Psalm 100. So my guess is that Leon Kramer took a melody by Barnby and put it to Psalm 100, because I could not find any composition by Barnby for Psalm 100. And the same thing with the next one, Charles K. Solomon, his composition for Psalm 84. Again, I think it's possible that Kramer rearranged a melody by these. These are famous composers of the day. Nowadays, you hardly ever hear their names for this service. Lewandowski's 30th Psalm that I wanted to play for you, but couldn't find a good recording. Hallelujah by Moss. This is what we still sing at weddings. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. And if there's time at the end, I'll play it for you. And the Shuba was by Dr. Mendes. I'm going to play this for you because I think some of you will recognize it, and others may not. But Dr. Mendes, in addition to being the minister, the rabbi, and the chazan of the congregation, was also a composer. And some of the best music of our synagogue was written by him. We always talk about this 23rd Psalm. We always talk about the 23rd Psalm. But here, what Dr. Poole calls Shuba, also known as Uvnu Choyomar, is another masterpiece. And I'm going to play it for you now. So here we go. So you can imagine that the music was pretty grand, especially if you had a large chorus and musical instruments accompanying it. Poole goes on about all the details. A few of them I want to point out to you. So there were a lot of important people who had carried Sifarim during this 7 circuits, and they had 14 Sifrei Torah. So they had a lot of different honorees. And he's writing in 1947, he says, the only survivor of all those who bore the scrolls of the Torah in the New York Synagogue around it in 7-fold circuits is the Reverend Leon El-Maleh, who we have talked about before. Reverend El-Maleh blew shofar for Sheretz Israel at that time. The next year, in 1898, he would become the Chazan in Philadelphia and Mikveh Israel. So he was one of the ones who carried Sefer. Other people he mentions, other people who participated in the service, Bernard Drachmann. I'll tell you another story about Bernard Drachmann another day. He was the rabbi in Orach Chaim and the chief of the rabbi of the New York Board of Ministers. Interesting character. Sabato Marias, Meldola Dasola, who were both at the ceremony for the Cornerstone. David Baruch, who was the rabbi in Newport, Rhode Island, in the Touro Synagogue. And then all sorts of famous people from the synagogue, descendants of original families, participated in the ceremony as well. And then there was a great sermon that was given by Sabato Marias, where he basically says, you know, it's wonderful here at Sheretz Israel that you've made this great edifice and have all these people here for this beautiful ceremony. But then he wrote, an exceptional concourse of Jews and Jewesses will wind their steps hither, but how vast will it be on other Sabbaths? And he's very, very prescient, you know, making sure that it's not just the special occasions that people come to, but really the week in, week out Shabbat services that are important. And then we'll finish that off. It's a pretty nice, a nice ceremony, and not without its own musar. Right here at the consecration of the synagogue on its first use. So I want to show you now something from the archives. I read to you earlier about the groundbreaking ceremony, the laying of the cornerstone. And so this whole presentation that I've given so far is so I can show you this picture. Because this picture, I think, is quite amazing. We read in detail about all the things they put in the cornerstone and the different newspapers that reported on it. And here is an actual photograph, literally a photograph, an early photograph. It's in bad shape. And every time I go to the archives, I think to myself, I need to have this sent to a conservator, which has all of the labeled by number, all these people. And some of them are famous and we know their pictures from other places. A lot of them are not. And this is the only photograph that we have of them. And so that's why I want to go through this with you. I think this is the part that I think is fun. And so here's the full picture, but now I'm going to show you close-ups. So bear with me here. So here we have in the left-hand side here, starting with number 1, the person not looking at the camera in any way is Professor Richard Gottheil. I think I have to do a little more Googling, but I believe he is one of the important Zionists at the time. And then you have some people who are just from the synagogue, important families. Number 2, 3, and 4 is Guy Hendricks, Ernest Hendricks, and Harmon Hendricks. Harmon Hendricks is an adult here. I think these are his children. Number 4, let's see here. This person doesn't have a number. Number 5 is Irene Brandon Graff. Irene Brandon Graff, who was a descendant of the Brandon family, which is an interesting family also for another talk. An old Sheretz Israel family. I think Laura Liebman writes about the Brandon family quite a bit. And she was, I Googled her a little bit. She was the president of Barnard. She was a graduate of Barnard, I think president of the Alumni Association. And there are like poems written to her by students and friends of hers. And I love her hat. I just absolutely love her hat. I think it's amazing. And so this was, most of the people that are pictured are men, but there were women there as well. And then you have, this must be, I think, a younger brother of hers, Vivian Brandon. And you have Jacob Satius. Jacob Satius was a Parnas of the congregation in the 1870s. Here you can see he's an old man. There is one other photograph of him. I did find another photograph, and this is not his only, but I don't know any photographs of all these other people here. The only photograph I know of them. Here we go. Now we have keeping right along. Number 8, this man with the mustache and the top hat is Joshua Hendricks. Again, the Hendricks family, if I haven't talked about them before, if you're not sure who they are, Hendricks family, old family in Sheretz Israel, going back to the American Revolution and the War of 1812 and the colonial period, all the way back. The Hendricks family, they came from London to the British colony of New York. They were traders essentially, and the fellow who was the head of the family, so to speak, at the time of the Revolution was Uriah Hendricks. And the family they remained in New York during the Revolution. They were Tories. Most of the congregation fled to Philadelphia. The Hendricks family stayed in New York. But then afterwards, they stay in New York after America wins its independence. They remain here in New York. And Uriah Hendricks starts trading in metals. And he has a son whose name I think is Harmon Hendricks. I get the genealogy a little bit off, but his son decides to take a tour of the country and find out what his clients want. And he realizes that just importing and exporting and trading in all kinds of metals is not where it's at. Where it's really at is copper. And he decides to manufacture copper here in America. They had been importing it. What happened was the War of 1812 broke out. He had already started manufacturing copper, and America couldn't get any metal from anywhere else. And so during the War of 1812, he becomes a very big patriot. He atones for the family's loyal British harbor allegiance during the Revolution, and they basically support with huge funding of war bonds, but also they provide the copper that sheathes the United States naval ships. Paul Revere did one of them. There were 4 ships, and the Hendricks family provided the other 3. And in fact, if you go to Boston today, you can see old Ironsides. I think it's still on commission. You know, it's a naval ship from the War of 1812, and its copper sheathing on its hull was made and given to the Navy by the Hendricks family. I'm spending a lot of time on them. I shouldn't spend so much time on them, but their descendants are still members of the synagogue today, and they're also they are the first industrialists. You know, before the robber barons, before J.P. Morgan, before the railroads, the first industrialists in America were the Hendricks family. And so we'll talk about them more another day. So there were a lot of members of the Hendricks family here, including this here is Joshua Hendricks with the mustache. Now we learn this is my favorite person because this is the Shamash, Levi Isaacs. And yeah, well, I still dress the same way pretty much. Maybe I should grow a mustache. And here is the president of the congregation, L. Napoleon Levy. Right next to him is the vice president, the Sagan, Louis Hyman. We talked about him in another class, I think once before, the Hyman lamps. And next to him, number 12, this is really, I don't know any pictures. This is Percy Jacobs. Percy Jacobs was the builder. But today we would call them the contractor, you know, the person who was responsible for the hiring of all the workmen and buying the equipment and building the actual thing to the specifications that the architect gives him, was named Percy Jacobs. Happened to be, Percy Jacobs it was a competitively bid out project, and he came in the lowest bidder, also from a colonial era family and a member of the synagogue. So my guess is he gave a good rate to the synagogue, didn't make a lot of profit on it. And that's him, and I don't know any other pictures of him right here. Next to him is Arnold Brunner. People talk about him a lot. He was the architect. And so he was present here at the laying of the Cornerstone. And then we have number 14 is Henry S. Allen. Henry Allen. Henry Allen, if I am not mistaken, Henry Allen was a chaplain during the Civil War, and a member of the congregation, and involved with the Polonese Talmud Torah School. Anyway, we'll keep keeping right along. Let's take a look at it as we keep going on along the dais here. Let me move this around so you can see. Here is J. Edgar Phillips. J. Edgar Phillips is the former Parnas. He's also the uncle, I believe, of Captain N. Taylor Phillips. Number 16. Here we have Reverend Meldola Dasola of Montreal. So the prayer books that the synagogue uses today as the David Dasola Pool prayer books. But before those were published in the 1930s. Before that, they used what was called the Dasola prayer books, which were made by that man, Meldola Dasola of Montreal. And since Rabbi Gabay is here, I guess I have to also tell you that what Meldola Dasola did was he bought the plates of Isaac Leeser. Isaac Leeser had published a Portuguese prayer book in the 1840s. And so Meldola Dasola bought the plates from that. So he used the product of Isaac Leeser, and then he had his own edits and translations and made his own prayer book, which was used throughout the Spanish-Portuguese world, certainly in America and right here in the Share of Israel. If you were interested, we have lots of them still around because they didn't throw them out when they bought the Dasola Pool ones. We just replaced them in the pews. So there are boxes and boxes of them in our Geniza. If you're ever interested, I can get you a copy. Okay, next to him is Henry Perry Mendes. It's amazing how young he looks here. I'm used to seeing him as an old man. Picture's not so great, but this is Henry Perry Mendes right here. Very tall top hat, I have to say. And next to him is Sabato Marias. Again, the picture's not so perfect, but I recognize the face from other photographs. He is a very elderly man. I think he dies within the year after this event. 19 is Reverend Abraham N. Nieto, Chazan Nieto, who was also an amazing scribe. And we have Sifrei Torah from him that are truly beautiful in the Amsterdam Ktav. He wrote quite a few, and he wrote a Sefer Torah for the inauguration of the synagogue in 1897. We used to use it on this day, but it's I'll see if Rabbi Road will use it. It's been used so much that we question the kashrut of it. But it's been used and used and used. The parchment on the bottom is all bent up because it's been used so frequently. And then here is another person with very few photographs known of him. This person, number 20 here. This is Julius J. Lyons. Julius J. Lyons is the son of the Chazan Jacques Judah Lyons. And I'll tell you a secret. We often credit Jacques Judah Lyons with a lot of beautiful music, including the Tenu Shabacha, and there's an Emet Malkeinu, and there's a Shuba, and there's a bunch of things that are written by, and a Yigdal by Jacques Judah Lyons. But the music just says J.J. Lyons. And it is possible that the music was written by his son, Julius J. Lyons, who was also a musician and a playwright. And so we don't actually know. We know that the Hebrew was written by Jacques Judah Lyons because it's in his own hand. But the music may have been written by his son. Don't know for sure. 20A, I love that they were so tight together, they had to fill it in. I can't even see the face here. 20A is Elmer Hendricks, a trustee. David de Meza, another trustee. That's this older man here. And 21 is Anthony Wallach. Some of these families still exist in the synagogue. Not all of them, but some of them. And again, the photograph has been augmented here. I don't know exactly why someone put a pencil in and made it easier to see some of the faces and some of the hats. So you can see some of the women's hats here and women's hats here, in addition to these cylinder top hats. Moving right along, we come to Joseph Blumenthal. Here we have him here. He was a veteran of the Civil War. He was a quartermaster, I think, in the Civil War. Next to him is Frederick Nathan. Frederick Nathan was a member of the stock exchange. His wife was Maud Nathan, who was a suffragette. and very, very prominent family in the synagogue. Maud Nathan was the first president of the sisterhood. And again, his relatives. And then I love the fact that there are the press and workmen, 24 and 25 and 24 and 25. These are workmen. And 26, 27, 28, these are the press. They had their own, their own special places they can take notes, and they went in the paper, as we saw earlier. And so that is, this is the whole picture again here. You can see it here. I just thought that this was, I was looking for an opportunity to show you this picture because I think it's really quite amazing. Look how big this tent is. This is on the spot of the synagogue. There are tons of people gathered around. And it's hard to get them all in the shot, but the reporter did a good job for the laying of the cornerstone. And we have this grand synagogue that we use to this day, all as a result of all of this activity here, and that they were able to build the synagogue. And so that's my presentation for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe a little light, maybe not as heavy as some of the other material. But what we're going to do now is we're going to count the Omer, and including the singing of Lamater, which was also sung at these events, both the cornerstone laying and the consecration. So if you want to join with me, if you haven't yet said your bracha, you can say it now with me. I can't even motzi you through the internet, but here we'll do it together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat haomer hayom 34 yom laomer shehem 4 shabonot v'shisha yamim harachaman yachazir avodat beit hamikdash lemkoma b'mehera b'yameinu Lamnateach b'nginot mizmor shir Elohim yichoneinu v'yibarecheinu Ya'er panav itanu sela ladat Ba'aretz darkecha b'chol goyim yeshuatecha Yoducha amim Elohim Yoducha amim kulam yitzmechu v'ranenu le'umim ki tishpot amim yishor u'umim ba'aretz anchem sela Yoducha amim Elohim Yoducha amim kulam Eretz natenai yebulam Yebarecheinu Elohim Eloheinu Yebarecheinu Elohim Ve'yireu oto kol afsei haaretz. I'm going to end my recording here and also stop the share. But stay tuned because I think we're going to talk about what we're going to do next week. And I want to hear a little feedback from you.